Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, the only booktube channel. Today I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about graveyards and ghosts and serial killers. I am talking about The Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. Thank you to Lucas over at the Bits of Lit for rudely informing me of how to properly say his last name. I've talked about Neil Gaiman before in this channel. I've been going through every single one of his Sandman collections. Pretty fascinating series. I've also read The American Gods a while back, but I haven't talked about it on this channel in depth. I liked it, but what's disappointing? This book was actually disappointing for a number of reasons that I'll get into. But I thought I'd talk about it for a little bit today. Go into what's what, and what Gaiman does good and what he does poorly. This book is interestingly about a child who lives in a graveyard, very very gothic and kind of atmospherically dark. Which is one of the better parts about it. So yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into this. I will talk about, or I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So the Graveyard Book starts with a serial killer named Jack going through a house and killing an entire family that lives in that house. However, he soon discovers that the baby boy who lives in the house has left because he left the door open, and so he follows the child to a cemetery. The child gets through the gates and finds himself in the presence of a ghost. And two of the ghosts, Mr. and Mrs. Owens, realize that the man outside of the gates wants to kill the small child. So they offer the child the protection of the graveyard, which prevents the serial killer from getting him while he's in the graveyard. And so the serial killer, Jack, leaves disappointed during that night. Nobody Owens then gets older. He has a guardian in the cemetery, one of the only sort of living people named Silas, who might be a vampire. But he's living with his sort of adopted parents, Mr. and Mrs. Owens, and he understands that he's living and the rest of them are dead, but it doesn't seem to scare him. And so around the time he hits 5 years old, he meets a young girl named Scarlett, who frequently visits the cemetery with her parents. It's also a nature reserve, so they're not just visiting a cemetery all willy-nilly. They hang out, they explore the cemetery, and they discover a cave in the cemetery that contains the Indigo Man, who is sort of a scarecrow-like figure. And they also discover the Sleer, which are protecting something. And although they're initially scared of the Sleer and the Indigo Man, they come to realize that they're not actually threats. Scarlett still leaves with her parents. And her parents eventually decide to move to Glasgow because she doesn't seem to be doing too well. They also believed nobody to be imaginary, so they didn't really have any proof that he existed in it. But Scarlett kind of felt that nobody was real. A little while later, Silas goes off on a journey somewhere, and in his absence, he leaves nobody with Miss Lupescu, who is kind of a hard-ass kind of person, but she's well-meaning. She teaches Bod, nobody, about ghouls and ghoul gates and stuff like that, and instructs him, never to go near ghouls. Well, nobody, being curious and also a bit of a fool, follows some ghouls into Ghoulheim, and they are about to turn him into a ghoul or kill him and eat him, something like that, when he's protected by Miss Lupescu, who is a werewolf of some sort, and also protected by the night gaunt owl things in the sky. And after that event, they bond together, and she promises to return from time to time when Silas is out and about. A little while later, he ventures into the unconsecrated part of the cemetery where they built, or where they buried thieves and people they didn't really care about. And he discovers Liza, who was accused of being a witch and killed. She says that they had no proof that she was a witch, although she was a witch, but they kill her without any real proof. And this causes Nobody and Liza to become closer together. They form a little bit of bond, and Nobody decides to try to repay her by giving her a headstone, which she doesn't actually have. And so at this point, he goes and visits a Banzer Bolger, who is in the business of sort of making headstones and stuff like that. And Nobody brings a stone that he stole from the Sleer, or borrowed from the Sleer, and tries to give it to a Banzer, but a Banzer realizes that there's more valuables to be had where this kid is concerned, and so he tries to hold him hostage. But luckily, Liza intervenes, and he manages to escape, and he gets her the headstone in the process, which brings them closer together. In another chapter, there's a secret meeting where Jack is at, and they discuss how Jack failed so many years ago, but Jack mentions that he's still in the process of hunting Nobody to finish what he set out to doing years ago. Why he had to kill those people, it's never fully explained, but he's still on the hunt for Nobody, which is clearly not good. In later years, Silas allows Bod to go to school, where people kind of don't really pay attention to him. He just kind of disappears, and he does encounter some bullies that he manages to outsmart and embarrass, but in the process, he kind of draws attention to himself, which worries Silas, and so Silas takes him out of school so he can't draw attention to himself and possibly get killed by people who are looking for him in the future. Sometime later, Silas goes missing. It's later revealed that he's hunting down the organization that is looking for Nobody at this time. Scarlet returns at this time, and they bond a little bit again. However, Scarlet encounters a man named Mr. Frost, who sort of gives her rides around town and helps her in her investigation as to what's happening to Nobody and finding his family. However, it's revealed that Mr. Frost is actually Jack Frost, of all names. And so he announces to Nobody that he intends to kill him right there on the spot, so that he can finish what he set out to do. And so Nobody and Scarlet flee towards the cemetery in order to hide. And this allows Nobody to outsmart the three other Jacks who come along with this Jack. They're the Jacks of all trade. It's really weird, and it's not explained to the final part of the story, which I don't feel it's explained well enough. And so he outsmarts them all in the graveyard, including locking one of them in Ghoulheim. They travel back to the cave with the Sleer and the Indigo Man, where Jack arrogantly announces that he is the master of the Sleer, which causes them to sort of envelop him and like destroy him in the process, that's what they were looking to do the whole time, and which is a little bit funny, I will admit. Scarlet reacts with horror upon seeing that Nobody outsmarted these men and did some pretty terrible things to them, although he says that he didn't kill any of them. He was just doing what he needed to do. And so Scarlet leaves, and then Silas follows her and sort of mind wipes Scarlet and whatnot, which makes Nobody sad. And then a few years later, Nobody finally decides to leave the graveyard to begin his life in the outside world, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's not a whole lot to talk about with the story, unfortunately. One interesting thing that Gaiman does is he unravels fear throughout the story. Like the Sleer and the Indigo Man are terrifying entities. In any other book, they'd be the biggest threat to the characters. However, he kind of unravels, what makes them scary. The Indigo Man is revealed to just be some sort of scarecrow, like a boogeyman to keep people out of the cave. And the Sleer, they are very protective of the valuables in their cave. and they don't want anyone around them. However, they're looking out for their master, who's never going to be coming. And if when the master does come, they immediately like kill Jack because he pretends to be the master, and so that's their scariest aspect. But their bark is worse than their bite, because if you don't fear them, they don't really have any effect on you, and they're kind of just a puppy dog, according to nobody and whatnot. I like how Gaiman kind of unravels what makes something scary and turns it on its head. It's one of the better aspects of this story, and also how just life among the ghosts can seem normal and even mundane at times. When in reality, like if you were amongst ghosts, like that'd be like, wow, this is different. But years living amongst ghosts becomes a normal thing. That seems to be the only thing that Gaiman did good in this book. The rest of it is just really bad or not, or very boring. That's a big problem with the story, is that it's very boring, very forgettable. I found myself struggling to pay attention to the book because there not a whole lot goes on in the story, and the things that do happen are just casually mentioned, and then they move on from them. There's no dwelling on a certain event. It's just, event happens, move on, event happens, move on, event happens, move on. Oh, Jack is back, by the way. Nobody defeats him without much of an issue. The story suffers from bad characters. I don't feel I know who nobody is, who Bod is. The story Gaiman sort of goes out of his way to make him a blank slate, to make him have as little characterization as possible. I'm not really sure why he does that. Like, Gaiman is really good at writing compelling characters. Shadow in American Gods, Wednesday, or Odin in American Gods as well, and also Dream in The Sandman, all wonderful characters. But here he seems to struggle writing any of these characters. They aren't fleshed out very well. Like, Jack should be a terrifying threat, but he's presented so little in this story that it seems like he's a non-factor, and you don't really know too much about him. Like, what's the secret organization that he's working for? Why did he kill nobody's family? Why is he still after nobody? What is nobody going to do that makes him a threat? It's never fully explained there, and you don't really get an insight into who Jack is, and so it just comes off very, very bland and generic. Like, Gaiman is being as vague as possible because he's afraid of being too specific and alienating his audience. But, alienating his audience isn't something that scared him off before. So I don't know what's going on here. And then another big problem with this is the plot. Again, he seems to move throughout the story at a rapid pace where no time is left to think about, what you just read. He just wants to move on and on and on. And I'm not really sure why the Secret Society wants to kill nobody. I'm not really sure, what having all these powers, because nobody has some powers throughout the story, what that means for nobody, what it means that he can walk among the living and the dead, and what it means when he'll eventually forget about living among the dead. It's very odd. Like, Gaiman presents all these interesting ideas and then never wants to develop on any of them. So the plot just is very boring, and I had to fight to concentrate on it. And I seriously considered just, not finishing the book, DNFing it. But I figured, it would eventually get better because it's Gaiman. It has to get better. And it's so it's so surprising that it didn't. And it really seems like Gaiman isn't trying. Like, he's proven that he's better than this before. Like, this is weak, weak writing that you would expect out of a freshman writer, a very rookie writer in maybe their first 5 years. But this is Gaiman, and he's been writing since the 80s, possibly before that, and I expect better from him, from someone who wrote the Sandman series, from someone who wrote American Goddamn Gods, for him to write this. And I get this might be focused at youths, but if you're sort of handicapping your own writing style to write to youths. Like, what? The youths deserve better too. So, I'm just really frustrated by this book because it's Gaiman. It's a rare misstep for Gaiman, and like if this were something that he started with, like, I could understand, but this is years into his career, and he should be pulling off much better work at this point in his life. And so I could go on and on about this, but I feel like I'm being very negative, so I'm just gonna stop there. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the very disappointing Graveyard book. I can't say that I recommend it to you out there, which is disappointing. I heard a lot of great things about it, and it comes from Neil Gaiman, which should mean it's wonderful, but unfortunately, it does not live up to the hype, which I'm just kind of sad about. It's like 300 pages, and I feel like I wasted my time with a book that should have been otherwise, quality. So yeah, I don't recommend it. Don't seek it out. There's better Neil Gaiman works out there that you should spend your time with. Have you considered reading American Gods, for instance? So if you read this book before, or you want to comment on something that I've said, please do so below. I would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a different take on this story than I do, and you can help me see it in a different light. In the meantime, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we can talk more about Neil Gaiman with other folks. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and undead travels. Farewell.